You're looking good. You who are 3 steps above average. I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter. I am author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. It's a commentary on the Old Testament. It's about the book of Job in the Old Testament, so I don't get into the Old Testament prophecies about Armageddon or the future. But I do recommend studying those prophecies. After you get a copy of my book, you'll feel great. You'll feel informed. You'll feel empowered. Either way, because we are on a war footing. A lot's happened in a week. This morning, with every paycheck, I do a personal net worth statement. And yes, I've lost money, but that's what happens when you have war. We slowly build it back over time, We're all concerned. Like I mentioned, if you're a person of faith, you know about the biblical prophecies, about the latter days, the last days, the end times. And we're all nervous, as it happens in any war setting. And there's a social media post. That's a madhouse. A couple of podcasts ago, I talked about anti-Trump obsessive compulsive disorder, just constantly posting and reposting negative things about Donald Trump, as if you're casting a magic spell to make him go away. Thaumaturgy and incantations. There's also hysterics, the rhetorical questions. You know, if it's a crime against humanity for Iran to own nuclear weapons, why is it a crime against humanity for the United States? Well, they're run by ayatollahs, and we're a republic, so people get to choose, and we have establishment and free exercise clause, so we don't have religious dominance over the government. That's why. You get these non sequiturs. You get these ventriloquist posts. Well, if you say this and I say that, I'm not saying that. And so you're just you're just talking to yourself like a ventriloquist. Sometimes it gets hard to say who's a ventriloquist and who's the mannequin. But I want to be a voice of calm and sanity during this time. So today's theme would be orientation. Getting our feet solidly on the ground and our head facing the right direction. So today's theme would be orientation. I normally begin with a breaking news segment, but during war, I can't keep up with each sortie and with each missile strike. In fact, I'm reading this book. This is In the Blood by Jack Carr. This is a 5th novel, and I write the numbers on top so I can keep track of them. I buy my books used. Helps pinch pennies. The cheaper thing would be check these out from the libraries, but I think if these are handy reference books. I'm reading this. This is already behind the times. This is, my goodness, when was this published? 2022. So 4 years ago, and this is just outdated. This is a crumbly, outdated book. It's worth reading, but yeah, I just can't keep up with things and such. So here's some 5 fail-safe principles. I posted these earlier on social media, but let me repeat them again. Fog of war. Be cautious with the news. People make mistakes. You remember with 9/11 how hysterical that was, those of you who are alive. It takes a while to sort things out, so just be cautious with the news. Like I said, we have these people, anti-Trump OCD, and this just puts them into overdrive, just going crazy, posting negative stuff about Trump. Which brings us to the second point, generative AI. This makes this whole fog of war situation worse. You see that thing like the Abraham Lincoln having him blown up, and it looks like an elementary school kid made this video. It's funny. I don't want to make fun. It's just these videos are so bad that they're unrealistic. Third point. Premortality. There is a just war theory. Some people are pacifist. I respect them. I think it's incorrect. I think it's incorrect to reframe Christianity, and I think it's incorrect to reframe the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as pacifists in the vein of Tolstoy, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King. There is a just war theory. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Point 4, prepare for General Conference. In less than a month, we'll have General Conference. I will be podcasting. I won't be doing it during it, but I will be doing the show. It's for my benefit. Certainly it's for your benefit. Like I said, I want to be a voice of calm reason and sanity. I just have friends who are having meltdowns, so I just want to say, okay, look, let's just hit the pause button here. Last thing is trusting in Jesus Christ. That's something President Oaks talked about at BYU. Trusting in Jesus Christ, increasing our faith in Him. That it's a problem that it's not in here. This is my scriptures. It is confusing with another thing I had. But are you really trusting in Jesus Christ, or are you trusting in the arm of flesh? The arm of flesh, the hand of flesh, that keeps reposting negative things about Donald Trump in an effort to make him go away. Well, so Warfront. This is from a few days ago. U.S. sinks 17 ships, hits 2,000 targets. Trump says Tehran forces largely knocked out. That's sources from Newsmax. That's from 3 days ago. That's old. You've been seeing we've probably sunk the entire Iranian Navy by now. So when you hear this war about news, I was born in 1970. We've always been at where the Vietnam War was going on. We always had a Cold War, a hot war going on at some point, Grenada invasions. Later, the Gulf War. I was on my mission during the Gulf War. We had the Iraqi War, Gulf War II. This is probably Gulf War III right now. I want to bracket this in terms of a peacemaker, but you're getting a taste of what the U.S. military can do once it's unleashed. Once you have a president that says, look, we're not going to hold anything back. We're not going to try and win a war. At the same time, be sensitive to our enemy's feelings. You see, previously we're trying to do two different things at once that are incompatible. You have that label and epithet of, yes, is imperialism, colonial imperialism. Well, if we want to be rampaging Caesars, we could have conquered the planet already. We're not. And what you're seeing is a very restrained, certainly it's focus and restraint, focused on the target and restraining. Really what this is about, yeah, it's a war about oil, but it's about cutting off the oil from Venezuela and Iran to China. Think geopolitically, what the geopolitics are. It's not about this or that, but there's a larger game going on. What you're seeing with this swift action is what the War Department can really do once it's unleashed. So America's imperialistic, but we've certainly restrained ourselves. It's the same thing. This is deny the broken treaties with the Native Americans, or some of the conquest, or the Mexican-American War. Ulysses S. Grant, our president, fought in the Mexican-American War, and he thought it was unjust. It was an unjust war. But America, the imperialist, but we're not rampaging the planet. It's a little bit when people say that Trump's Hitler, they're comparing to Hitler and Stalin. I guess I have this friend of mine who's going off the deep end with serious political values, but he's just going bonkers. If you say that Trump's Hitler, if that were true, Pelosi and Harris would have disappeared a long time ago, but they're not. If Trump was a dictator, Joe Biden never would have assumed the White House. The idea that Trump's a fascist and that Joe Biden was president, those are absolutely incompatible ideas. Because Trump did surrender power. He did leave the White House. He didn't have an election. January 6th went on for about 2 hours, a little bit longer. But it wasn't this existential crisis. It wasn't an extinction level event. I don't want to minimize the depth, but you remember Occupy Seattle, that went on a little bit longer. You don't have any problem with that. And yeah, government buildings were involved. So have your chatbot tell you about the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. Have your chatbot do, and reframe that in what the chatbot says. Whatever your chatbot of choice is. Limbic system, prefrontal cortex. So let's go into the lead story. Operation Epic Fury and Captain Moroni. I did talk about just war theory. Joseph Smith was a lieutenant general in the militia. Lorenzo Snow actually went to war college. It's interesting if you read his biography, his sister Eliza didn't like him doing it, but she did sew his uniform for him. but a just war. Now, in the Book of Mormon, this is what the just war theory or just war parameters are explained in the Book of Mormon. And they were, I'm quoting, and they were doing that which they felt was the duty which they owed to their God. For the Lord had said unto them, and also unto their fathers, that inasmuch as ye are not guilty of the first offense, neither the second, ye shall not suffer yourselves to be slain by the hands of your enemies. And again, the Lord has said that, ye shall defend your families even unto bloodshed. Now think about that in terms of Martin Luther King, nonviolence. The Book of Mormon says that, yeah, it's a commandment. It's a commandment. You will defend your families even into bloodshed. And as much as you laud Martin Luther King and Gandhi, that's not what the Lord's taught. That's not the doctrine of Christ. That's a mixture of Leo Tolstoy and then the Indian or the Jain principle of ahisma. So you shall defend your families even unto bloodshed. Therefore, for this cause were the Nephites contending with the Lamanites and to defend themselves and their families and their lands and their countries and their rights and their religion. Alma 43, 46 through 47. So you clear on that? Remember, the church is still under condemnation for neglect of the Book of Mormon, and part of it, I mean, a small part, would have to do with our understanding of just war theory, that there's good members, but who are honestly mistaken about nonviolence. It's a commandment to defend your families, even unto bloodshed. Doctrine and Covenants, section 98, 23 through 38. So section 98 has that really long section about extending the hand of peace and forgiving your enemies, and the first time, the second time, the third time. But it's interesting, at the end it says, after a certain threshold, the Lord will fight your battles. And as always, God works through natural means to make his miracles. I discussed that last week. There's some debate with Judge Thomas Griffith about the nature of miracles. Section 101. According to the laws and constitution of the people, which I have suffered to be established and should be maintained, established and maintained, for the rights and protection of all flesh, according to just and holy principles. The Constitution is for all flesh. That's why it served as a model for all the constitutions on the planet. 3 countries don't have them: New Zealand, Israel, and the United Kingdom. But every other country follows a pattern that we have, having a constitution with a Bill of Rights. Next verse, that every man may act in doctrine and principle pertaining to futurity. Down the chokes, where will this lead? Pertaining to futurity, what's going on? What's the steps of this? Not the panic attacks about we're going to war. What happens if you have a democracy in Israel, Iraq, and Iran? How does that affect the gathering of Israel? Reframe this as the gathering of Israel. We had to fight a war with Great Britain to get the restoration. The Soviet Union was able to collapse. We need to get the gathering of Israel into these Arabic communist countries. That every man may act in doctrine and principle pertaining to futurity, according to the moral agency which I have given unto him, that every man may be accountable for his own sins in the day of judgment. Therefore it is not right that any man should be in bondage one to another. And for this purpose, and you see the church is kind of funny about slavery, but no, straight and right here it says it's not right that any man should be in bondage one to another. For this purpose have I established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I raised up unto this very purpose, and redeemed the land by the shedding of blood. We may have to redeem Iraq by the shedding of blood. We may have to redeem Iran by the shedding of blood. We don't want it, but the facts of reality may be such that. And I'm not advocating war or invasion or insurrection or anything like that. I'm just stating a philosophical fact, and it's not the purpose of the church to lead an army. That happens when the Lord of Hosts, the Jehovah of Armies, comes. You'll have to do it, but not right there, unless President Hinckley or President Hinckley talked about that. But President Oaks tells us we do have conference coming up. But think about that. The Lord did rise up wise men in this country, and maybe your gender studies degrees tells you otherwise. But what wins? What wins out? Your university, your gender studies degree, or the revelation of God? Who do you follow? Who do you put your faith in? Who's going to resurrect you? Who's going to exalt you? So let's go back and review what President Hinckley said about 9/11 for historical context. This was October 2001. If you remember, right during General Conference, President Bush launched the strike against Iraq. The same thing happened as they declared World War I during General Conference. It was on April 6th when the United States declared war against Germany. President Hinckley said, "It is the terrorist organizations that must be ferreted out and brought down. We of this church know something of such groups. The Book of Mormon speaks of the Gadianton robbers, a vicious, oath-bound, and secret organization bent on evil and destruction. In their day, they did all in their power by whatever means available to bring down the church, to woo the people with sophistry, and to take control of the society. We see the same thing in the present situation." So the facts of reality change with Iraq. Is Iraq no longer Al-Qaeda Gadianton robbers? May 2003, a few years later, or this is April 2003 conference, said President Hinckley, "We are a freedom-loving people committed to the defense of liberty wherever it is in jeopardy. I believe that God will not hold men and women in uniform responsible as agents of their government in carrying forward that which they are legally obligated to do. And maybe it may even be that he will hold us responsible if we try to impede or hedge up the way of those who are involved in this contest with the forces of evil and repression." You hear that? We always had demonstrators at the Port of Oakland that were, Oakland, California, were trying to hinder the delivery of war supplies. President Hinckley says, you're going to be in trouble if you're hindering that. But what about other forms of hindrance? Now, there's always room for legitimate debate and discussion, but what happens when you're creating a situation where we can't defend freedom? If someone's in denial or there's an avoidance tactic, that's what a lot of this is there's a problem, people just don't want to deal with it, so they try and imagine the problem away. Russell M. Nelson, "Blessed are the peacemakers," 2002, also during the context of the 9/11 and the Gulf War II, the war on Iraq. Then more recently, President Nelson talked about peacemakers needed in 2024. Although 2002, that was more of a war. 2024 was an interpersonal with the George Floyd riots and the acid on social media. For some, I had to do this with my cousin's daughter. Let's just call her a niece, but a little more separated. But she is criticizing Donald Trump, and then finally had to say, "Look, I appreciate your perspective and point of view. It's meaningful to me. I am concerned about your violence ideation." She's married, and if a woman, and remember there's a gender bias against women, people don't take women acting out violently seriously. If there's a woman and she's married and she has a violence ideation, it's going to be taken out on her husband and possibly her children. And this is where we're at. You're going to have to speak up about it. Donnelly Chokes, "Defending Our Divinely Inspired Constitution," 2021. Love Your Enemies, 2020. "Preparing for the Second Coming," 2004. So over 20 years ago, President Oaks gave a talk about preparing for the Second Coming. Ought you not to brush up on it? When I was a kid, you would have the quad, then you have the manual, then you have the church magazine. It's all on our phone now. You can sit there in your hot tub and get prophetic insight about the latter days here. And we're actually going to be held accountable if we start dinking around with it. And remember, read from the source. Don't trust your chatbot summary or your charismatic podcaster with the theme song and the t-shirts and the merchandising. Now, of course, I sell my book here, but I don't do t-shirts or, here's the mug, here's the Eyes of Faith mug, and we're going to have a cruise up in Alaska where I reach out. And no, I don't do that. It's just you, me, and the truth. This is intentionally a skeletal, bare bones, garage band podcast. I hope it conveys authenticity. I'm not here to make money off of you. I'm here to discuss the truth and be a voice of reason and sanity so we can rejoice together. News blips, war tends to suck up everything, but there's other stuff going on. This is a report. This is from Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. about political polarization. And it says this, and I put the links in. Almost all the rise in U.S. polarization over political issues since the late 1980s occurred from 2008 onwards, a new study suggests. Most of this has been driven by the American left becoming more socially liberal over time. And it's from the Royal Society publishing a new measure of issue polarization using K-means. So I'm not a statistician. People who are statisticians can comment on that. This is something we saw and felt. And bless their souls, we love them. But the radicalization hasn't been from the right. It's the left constantly moving left and left and left and left and left and left and left since 2008. In 2008, you had two things happen. The Great Recession. You also had the election of Barack Obama. Now, it's correlation. That's not causation. But it's an interesting correlation. Did your desire for egalitarianism and racial equality and racial justice to get President Obama elected, supported by Colin Powell and Oprah Winfrey, did you lose something in the process? Did other things happen besides just that fundamental transformation of America? So that's one thing. Another thing, too, is think about shadowbanning, deplatforming President Trump off of Twitter, deplatforming Parler. That app went away. What was going on is conservatives knew that their posts were getting they're getting demonetized, pushed down out of the algorithm, and Twitter denied it. Jack Dorsey, it was his company, so he stands accountable. He said it wasn't going on. Elon Musk bought Twitter, and it was investigated. It's like, yeah, it was actually going on. The words being shadow banning, our voices were being silenced. And that was part of this radicalization process. The one true opinion that Bill Maher talks about. This is a factual question. This isn't your perception. Oh, you see things differently. Or apophenia. This is, you see a cloud. I see a bouquet of flowers. Oh, I see a kitty cat in the closet. No, this is objective. Cambridge University. This radicalization of the left, the shift of the left, this polarization affected BYU because universities tend to be more liberal than other organizations. So if BYU drifts, the church membership drifts. And the reason why that is that BYU is an integral part of the church system. It's a constellation that's interactive. The gravitational pull of the stars interact with each other with the church membership at BYU. That goes through the graduates. It goes through Education Week. It goes through BYU TV. It also through Deseret Book, which publishes books written by BYU authors. So we start tracking it down. You notice how the shift, that BYU's drift, affected the drift of the church. It's an entwined nexus. And the shift is always between three models. You have the French Revolution model of liberty, equality, fraternity, and human nature being good. The USA model, life, liberty, and property, human nature being mixed. You have the Zion model, the Doctrine of Christ model. Those are three separate models, and they're starting to shift towards the French Revolution model. This also creates another issue. It's a repetitive problem we just don't learn. As we try and be inclusive, which is always a good thing, visitors welcome to the church. But in order to be inclusive, what happens is sometimes people relax standards. They loosen things to make it easier for people to be inclusive. I remember as a little kid, there was a Samoan ward was holding a party and walked in there, and they're having a party in our chapel. It's a shared chapel, and I noticed they had a large coffee pot in there. Have we got to the point where we can no longer say that that's a problem? Are we so inclusive that having a ward activity with they're serving coffee? Have we reached that threshold of open-mindedness, straight as the gate and narrow as the way? So we relax standards to be inclusive, and then a few years later, we start moaning about the drift Well, it's because you relax standards. You let things slide where you should have spoken up. And you'll see this in local wards where someone wants to tweak things, and then over time the tweak creates a matter of a few degrees, as President Uchtdorf put it. Let's do a little tweak here, and over time the deviation occurs, and that's what happened with the left as they made this shift away from the American model to the French Revolution model. And son of a gun, this is the situation we're in. And then the problem is scapegoating Republicans, calling Republicans the radicals. As you always know, there's a projection problem. There's a Freudian slip problem. Every time the left accuses Republicans of being something dastardly, it's always a Freudian slip. This is Mike Lee posted this senator. I went to school with him. It's kind of funny that he's a senator now. New York Post had this from October 2024. Hillary Clinton warns that allowing free speech on social media means, quote, we lose control. Isn't that what shadowbanning was about? Taking Parler away? It's a control issue, the one true opinion that Bill Marx calls about it. So that's Hillary Clinton. I've talked about the radicalized single white female. They use another acronym. It's called AWFUL, Affluent White Female Urban Liberals. That's from the American Thinker. You have the articles about the self-made billionaires versus the inheritrixes. Inheritor is male, inheritrix is female, and inheritrices is female. It's being a little bit stricter with the Latin. So you have these women who inherit money. Think about Bill Gates' wife, or was it Bezos' wife? I can't remember now. I can't keep track of the billionaire soap opera. So the people who actually earn the money say, okay, reality functions a certain ways, and then you have the females say, no, let's make it work the other way, running off the French Revolution model. Think about the business model that's arisen. That's by Nancy Pelosi and Ilhan Omar. So the wife runs for public office. So you have female representation. In this case, we know what a female is with Pelosi and Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar is an immigrant that adds to the intersectionality. And so the wife runs for public office, and the husband suddenly becomes rich. That cash register chinging, if you're old enough to remember back when cash registers did that. The wife runs for office, female, so intersectionality, they're untouchable. You can't criticize them. And then the husband suddenly becomes rich. What's the segment next? We're at half an hour. Not surprising news. America is winning a hot kinetic war. And that's not surprising news. America 250. Right here, got this. This is an unofficial hat. They have the official logo. I'm old enough to remember the bicentennial as a little kid. So America 250. America 250. Think about the history of war. That's just another thing to have your chatbot of choice study for you. Tell about the history of war in America to contextualize what's going on with Operation Epic Fury. Is it a war or is it just an operation? They did try to have a war powers election and it didn't pass, so it's still the Trump has gave them a I don't know what the opposite of a veto is. They gave him the okay. They didn't try to impede what Trump was doing. Segment on culture comment. This is back to the Cambridge study about the radicalization, the polarization of the left. Culture comment. There's a book written by Francis Fukuyama. I think he was a professor at Harvard. And this book's called The Great Disruption. The Great Disruption by Francis Fukuyama. And he talks about this cultural shift in the 1960s, but it was a very small, like I said, a matter of a few degrees. And then by 2008, the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution models just became irreconcilable. If you believe human nature is good, you go one direction. If you say it's mixed, you go another direction. If you say human nature is bad, as in strains of Protestantism, Calvinism, and Luther, you go a third direction. And that's where that drift that started early on, which C.S. Lewis talks about in his book, Abolition of Man, and also That Hideous Strength. It was going on in C.S. Lewis days, but it was still a matter of a few degrees, and then it finally took off around the 60s, around 2008. Life's some pointers. This is a good time to double check your budget, start building up your food storage. When you get your tax refund, Don't bite on a Taylor Swift bobblehead. Put in your savings and your emergency fund. If your emergency fund is top, 3 to 6 months, and you have your chatbot can set up a budget for you. Like I said, I'm not negative chatbot. It's just a tool like anything else. It's a tool like a nutcracker or a sledgehammer. It has its purposes. It can be abused. Throwing your nutcracker at the neighbor with the barking dog. That's a joke. Think back to previous wars. What's an appropriate thing to do on the home front? Have your chatbot tell you about, there's this war going on, epic fury. What should I as a citizen be doing? I did make this prediction that Generation Alpha will lose the ability to think because of chatbots. Let's see if this happens. Half an hour. The last one where I had to criticize my alma mater. That wasn't pleasant. It went on too long. I was having a little bit of a health issue. My voice was raspy. Here at the e-devotional, I'll leave with a spiritual thought. I like to talk about this prophecy. Now, I read this as a kid. This is 1988, 1989. Cold War was going on. And we still had NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Gorbachev was doing glasnost and perestroika at the time, but still the Cold War was going on. I read this. This is a biblical prophecy. Zechariah 14, 2 through 3 says, prophesied the Jewish prophet, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the woman ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people should not be cut off from the city." So, is this about the Babylonian captivity? Certainly it applies to that, but it says all nations against Jerusalem to battle. In Hebrew, the word for nations is also could be translated as goyim, but could also be translated as Gentile. The Gentile nations, redundant statement. But I read that, it's like, okay, all nations, that include the United States, would be at war with Israel. So U.S. and the Soviet Union, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, they're going to invade this country the size of New Jersey. Could not believe it. Now, no problem whatsoever. No problem whatsoever. Believe it. This is a no-brainer on this. So I'm not talking. So I read the words of the prophecy, but I'm not giving a prophecy or an interpretation. This is more of a scenario, and this is mental wargaming. So we have Operation Epic Fury, which is really spearheaded by the United States and Israel. I saw this clip. I think it was off of Sun, so hopefully it's been filtered because you don't know what you're watching on the internet. But it was 50 Israeli jets just blowing up the compound of the late Ayatollah. So what happens? You get a next president comes in, and this president's anti-Semitic. Most likely that'd be a Democrat president, but you can't have a Republican who's an anti-Semite. It's just pervasive, and so at some point you get a Republican president and says, "Hey, look, the Jewish conspiracy. That's they got us in the war here. Epic Fury was an epic failure, and it's the Jews' fault. So it's time for a regime change in Israel. It's an apartheid state." You're right. So does that remind you of these Tom Clancy books you used to read? That I just posted possible scenarios. You get a president in there, possibly a Democrat in there, says that the Jews tricked the United States into going into war with Iran, and it's the Jews' fault. So let's do regime change in Israel because they're a apartheid state. Yeah, that's why I said that prophecy can be fulfilled rather. Everything I said is plausible. Like I said, I'm not predicting. I'm just sort of strategizing and wargaming. However, the next verse says, "Then shall the Lord, that is Jehovah, go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the days of battle." So this isn't the total prophecy. We have other prophecies, the time of the Gentiles. We still need missionaries in other countries. But certainly the ducks are lining up. Everything's almost in apple pie order. We've got all the ducks in a row. A lot of the ducks are in a row. So just think about that while you're sitting through a general conference. Because at some point, this is going to happen. Armageddon will happen at some point. So I'm not giving a date or time, but you're certainly seeing pieces move into place. Or as you're twisting the Rubik's Cube of history, the colors are lining up. April 2019, as president of his church, I plead, said Russell, this is Russell M. Nelson, as president of his church, I plead with you, you have distanced yourselves from the church, and with you, I plead with you who have distanced yourselves from the church, and with you who have not yet really sought to know the Savior's church has been restored. Do the spiritual work to find out for yourselves, and please do it now. Time is running out. So that's about a year ahead of COVID-19. So it was the prophet gave us a year warning. Look, time's running out. You really need to get serious about the church, whether you've left the church or you're just curious about it, because time's running out. And for many people, it was. I worked at a hospital, and I remember the first time we saw I saw a nurse with a PAPR helmet on, and that sent a jolt through my body. And then as it progressed, in the intensive care unit, I'd see the people who were sleeping on their stomachs. Now, why you sleep on your stomach is it gets the body weight off of the lungs. But if someone's sleeping on their stomach, that means they're in a really bad situation. They're on ventilators, on respirators, and they're sleeping on their stomach to make it easier for them to breathe, because this was a respiratory disease. Time is running out, 2019. October 2024, he gave a talk about the second coming, and that's when we talked about the virgins and the parable of the talents, that conference. In April 2025, said President Nelson, we do not know the day or the hour of his coming, but I do know that the Lord is prompting me to urge us to get ready for that great and dreadful day. And that's the last thing he said as prophet. And then in President Oaks, as a devotional at BYU, he said, quote, take care not to become distracted. Remember his parable of the 10 virgins who want to be among the 5 humble ones who were admitted to the presence of the Lord. Once again, we're talking about the wise and foolish virgins, a 50-50 split. So tomorrow when you go to church, think about your operating system. Is this a wise virgin operating system, or am I running on a foolish virgin operating system? Not righteous, not temple recommend holding, not okay, you hold a temple recommend, you don't hold a temple recommend. You're a high priest, you're not a high priest, it's not missionary, it's not a return missionary, non-return missionary, it's not single or married. It's wise and foolish. And are you operating under a operating system of wisdom when you go to church tomorrow? When you place the sacrament bread in your mouth, you take that cup, think about that. Really think about your operating system. What type of virgin system are you operating on? That's the devotional. And that's the passing scene with the eyes of faith.